Hello VC, this is my response to Andy Cloudy Maido's 300 subs contest. Congratulations Andy, I like your channel, I like your ramblings, so keep it up. So Andy asked us 3 questions, and the first one was to show album with number 3 on a title. And I was surprised that I haven't seen this first album shown with the responses that I have watched. I haven't watched them all. This is Led Zeppelin 3, released in 1970. The second album is Genesis 3 Sides Live, released in 1982. And the third album was slightly different, because one of the rules that Andy said was that it doesn't necessarily have to include the number 3 on the sleeve. It could be symbols, so I took that one as my cue. And this is The Cure 3 Imaginary Boys. 3 used here as symbols, 3 imaginary boys, released in 1979. And this album doesn't actually include the album title anywhere on the sleeve except here on the spine. It's not mentioned even on a record label. Neither are the song titles. None of the song titles are mentioned here either. All the songs here are as symbols. Like this one here is Grinding Halt, and that one is Meat Hook. And the song titles are not mentioned on this on the label either. They are only by number. There's like for example, number 1, and then there's a symbol behind it. For example, this one would be Fire in Cairo. So yeah, 3 imaginary boys. The second question was to show a favorite third studio album. And when I was watching Andy's video, the very first one that came to my mind while listening to those questions was this one. This is Hokey Pokey by Richard and Linda Thompson. They recorded 3 albums for the Island label, and there was a live album released about 30 years later, which was recorded during this same period. After these 3 albums, they left Island, and they also changed their style. But these 3 albums for the Island label were fantastic. They are like partly like very traditional British music, folk music, folk rock, but yeah, very haunting, very gloomy stuff, but absolutely wonderful, and Linda's voice is absolutely fantastic. The second one is Janis Joplin. I got them all, Cosmic Blues Again Mama. Her third album released in 1969. This was also her solo debut album. She had recorded 2 albums as a member of Big Brother and a holding company. And this one is I like all 4 of her albums, but this is my favorite from Janis Joplin. And then the third one, this is Finnish group called Neljä Ruusua. Album title is Hyvää päivää. The group name translates as 4 Roses, and album title translates as Good Day. Their first 2 albums were not commercial successes in any way. The second album had a couple of the songs that were played some on the radio, but I wouldn't call them even as radio hits, but they did gain some airplay. They were mostly like very much like punk flavored rock music, not exactly punk, but punk flavored rock music. But this one took a big leap towards commercial music. Sound is much more softer, there's much more variety to the songs, but it's excellent. This one, at the time of the release, this didn't sell that much, although it sold like 10 times more than the first 2 albums, but it didn't actually sell that much at that point. It was during the following album to this one that they really made their big commercial breakthrough, and during that time this album also sold a lot. Okay, and a third question was to show an album with the band on its 3rd lineup. Luckily this one didn't have to be my favorite album from that group. It just had to be on its 3rd lineup, and that's why I chose this one. This is Jefferson Airplane Bark, released in 1971. Jefferson Airplane was formed in 1965 with Marty Balin on vocals, Signe Tolly Anderson on vocals, Paul Kantner on guitar and vocals, Jack Cassidy on bass, Jorma Kaukonen on guitar, and Skip Spence on drums. They recorded their first album with that lineup, and for the second album, Skip Spence left the group and was replaced with Spencer Dryden, and the vocalist Signe Tolly Anderson also left group and was replaced with Grace Slick. And the band recorded several albums and were together for several years with that lineup until this album. And by the time they started recording this album, the drummer Spencer Dryden left and was replaced by Joey Covington. Joey Covington had been a drummer for the offshoot group of Jefferson Airplane. That was Hot Tuna, formed by guitarist Jorma Kaukonen and bassist Jack Cassidy. And they formed that to be a simple blues cover group, and they started performing as a warm-up act for the Jefferson Airplane during their tours. And sometime later they added the drummer Joey Covington so that they could jam longer. And when Spencer Dryden left, Joey Covington joined Jefferson Airplane. He had already performed sometimes as a guest with Jefferson Airplane, so he was well known for the group, so he was an easy replacement. Soon thereafter, Cassidy and Kaukonen kicked him out of the Hot Tuna, and he was replaced with Sami Piazza. Marty Balin, the true original founding member who had the vision for the group, also left the band during this period, but he was not replaced with another vocalist. He was replaced with a violinist. He was called Papa John Creech, and he was introduced to this band through the new drummer Joey Covington. Papa John Creech also joined Hot Tuna. After this, they released one more studio album, Long John Winter, the Long John Silver, the following year, 1972. But during a tour for that album, Cassidy and Kaukonen left Jefferson Airplane and the band broke up. Sometime after the broke up of the band, there was a live album release, 30 Seconds of Winterland, and 17 years later they regrouped for one more album, self-titled Jefferson Airplane album, but I don't have any of those three albums. And this one is my least favorite of all the Jefferson Airplane albums. This is simply just too weird stuff. There's a couple of good tracks here too, but mostly this is just too weird. They had recorded weird tracks on the earlier albums, but mostly those albums were good. This was just weird with a couple of good tracks on it. Okay, the second album is Pelle Miljoona ja 1980, Pelle Miljoona in 1980. And this is not only Pelle Miljoona's third lineup, this is his first, second, third and fourth lineup. The third lineup comes from this being his second album, and the first album was recorded with two different lineups. So they changed their bass player during the sessions for their first album. So the first album was released with two different lineups, and this one was their second album and first. So this was their third lineup and first lineup for 1980, and also this was the second album, so second lineup as the recorded groups. And there was also between the first group, which was called NUS, and this one, there was another group called 1978. 1978 was never recorded anything, just played some live gigs, and it was essentially the same group as this one, but if I recall correctly, Ari Taskinen was not the member of 1978, so it was just the Pelle Miljoona, Rubber Duck Jones and Tumpi Varonen, and then they added Ari Taskinen and became 1980. 1980 later on added another guitarist, Stefan Piesnak, so it became a 5-member group. Okay, and then the third one is Fleetwood Mac, Kiln House, released in 1970. And Fleetwood Mac was actually formed 2 different times. The very first time it was formed, it was a 3-piece. It was Peter Green on vocals and guitar, Mick Fleetwood on drums, and John McVie on bass. But it wasn't a real group at that point. It was just a group that recorded a couple of songs in a studio. They were given a free time at the end of John Mayall's Bluesbreakers studio sessions. They were all members of John Mayall's Bluesbreakers at that point. And one of the tracks that they recorded at that point was instrumental titled Fleetwood Mac. Sometime later, Peter Green and Mick Fleetwood left the group, left the Bluesbreakers to form Fleetwood Mac, and they wanted to get John McVie with them, but he was not ready to leave Bluesbreakers at that point. So they brought in bassist Bob Brunning, and they started recording some tracks at that point, and they added 4th member Jeremy Spencer on guitar and vocals. And then they later on managed to convince John McVie to leave Bluesbreakers and join Fleetwood Mac, and they recorded their first album with that lineup. Peter Green, guitar and vocals, Jeremy Spencer, guitar and vocals, Mick Fleetwood drums, and John McVie on bass. Although the first album does include at least 1 track with Bob Brunning on bass, but that was recorded during the earlier sessions. So that was the first lineup. The second album was recorded with the same lineup, but for the third album they added a 3rd guitarist and vocalist, Danny Kirwan. And then, before making of this album, Peter Green left the group, leaving them as a 4-piece. Danny Kirwan guitar and vocals, Jeremy Spencer guitar and vocals, John McVie bass, and Mick Fleetwood drums. What I didn't remember was that Christine McVie was not yet a member of the group, although this album sleeve is actually her drawing, and she had already been playing piano on some of the tracks on Fleetwood Mac's second album, and this was their 4th album. But she wasn't yet a member of the group. She became a member of Fleetwood Mac shortly after the release of this album. So that was the 3rd lineup, and with Christine McVie it was their 4th lineup. Okay, that was it. Hope you liked this, Andy. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment. Bye.